You are on, ma'am.
Thank you. Appreciate it. At 5:01, I will call, or 5:02, it looks like, let's see, what's today, April 7th meeting of the Quality of Life Committee to order, and if we could get a roll call.
Of course, Councillor Cassett Sanchez,
Here.
Councillor Garcia,
Present.
Councillor Rivera,
Here.
Councilwoman Villarreal,
Present.
and Chair Romero Worth.
I am also here. Thank you. All right, with that, are there changes to the agenda tonight?
Yes, we are removing item 7E from the agenda.
Okay, removing item 7E.
Yes.
Okay. And if there are no changes from committee, can we get a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
And a roll call then, please, Jennifer.
Sorry, just 1 second. Let me record the motion
No worries.
again.
For-
I'm
just
a
for
little
everybody
slow today.
who might be watching, the PrimeGov program that we use is being slow this evening.
Yes. Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, we go to approval of the consent agenda. Are there items the committee would like to pull to be heard tonight for discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Garcia.
I'd like to remove item A as in apple and M as in magic.
Okay. Councilor Casa Sanchez, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes. M is on my list and has already been pulled. And then N, I would like to pull as we are getting a presentation that is relevant. And so I want to pull it in case that information.
Okay. And other councilors, Councilor Rivera, Councilwoman Villarreal, anything?
M to discuss, we've already
Yep.
said that.
Yep.
M to discuss amendments that aren't in the PrimeGov.
N, I'm sorry?
M is in magic.
Yes.
And just to discuss amendments that are not in our packet.
On M or on N? I'm sorry.
M is in Mary.
Okay, all right. I thought you had pulled two is what I was asking. All right. Councilor Rivera, anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
All right, I think we have a motion by Councilor Villarreal and a second by Councilor Rivera. And can we get a roll call?
Yes. Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. From there, we'll go to approval of the minutes, March 17th of the Quality of Life Committee. Are there changes to those minutes from either staff or the committee?
None from staff, Madam Chair.
And I don't see any from the committee, so if we could get a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
So we have a motion from Councilor Cassett Sanchez, second from Councilwoman Villarreal, and one more time, a roll call on this one.
Of course. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, on to presentations. So I had asked that Director Brown come and talk to us a little bit about the Economic Development Fund. I think it's very important that we know, and I'm sorry, and from the City Attorney's Office, Andrea Salazar. So thank you both for joining us. I had wanted some background on this fund. I think it's really important that we understand that this fund is currently funding work in Director Brown's department. And I think we need to understand the nature of that work and the impact that taking 50% of it and putting it somewhere else will have on any work plan that's currently envisioned for the funds. And for us to make sure that we are, as we look at taking a portion of this fund, that we find the sweet spot. So 50% may be too much, it may be just right. And I wanted to hear from Director Brown a little bit more context so that we can best make that decision if it's something that as a group, the governing body decides is a proper funding mechanism for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So with that introduction, just wanted to give you a little background about why they're here tonight. And Director Brown, I guess I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. Thank you for the time. I have a couple of slides that hopefully will provide some context on the Economic Development Fund and economic development. And Andrea Salazar is with me to talk about the ordinances, sort of give you some background, and then I'll take you through what we fund and what we don't, and what's in it and what's exempt, and then some ideas around how we are looking at moving forward. So, share my screen. Okay. So sorry, my kid's been playing video games today. So if I'm slow, just tell me to raise your hand and I'll turn off my video, but hopefully this still will work. I had some issues with presentations today. So I'm gonna have Andrea start off by talking about the Economic Development Fund and the resolution and ordinances that into 4. So Andrea, if you could just take the first 2 slides here and just talk about it, and then I'll talk about how we disperse that money.
Sure. Good evening. So first off, in 1998, a resolution established the Economic Development Fund. It was later adopted via ordinance in 2000. For the purposes, and while it is a long paragraph of purposes, this is the 3 points that come out of it. To identify sources of revenue to deposit into the fund, to restrict expenditures to activities which implement the goals, strategies, or approach of the city's economic development plan, or qualify as economic development projects from chapter 11-11.4. And so those main goals are what is adopted under the economic development plan, and also LEDA projects. Rich is really going to go into that in detail, but those are really the 2 pockets that this comes out of. And to support activities which serve to diversify the local economy, which don't have any access to other funding sources from the city. So the main revenue comes from 2 places: the 1% city share of NMGRT and sales of city real estate assets and lease agreements. The next slide that Rich is going to show you are the exemptions that have been carved out of this sales of real assets and lease agreements.
Yeah, and so before I go there, I do want to share that the Economic Development Department has a line item that does receive revenue from the general fund. So we're funded by the general fund and by this Economic Development Fund. So I'm sorry, Andrea, if you want to take this.
So last year there was an added exemption. So under 11-14.5, this is the dedication section that net proceeds from any sale or lease of city-owned property shall be deposited into the Economic Development Fund. Over the years, this has been carved down to last year, Las Estrellas and Santa Fe Estates were taken out. All of the rail yard properties, both sales and leases, are removed. Midtown Campus, I guess, Rich has identified the specific properties that we're talking about right now, the scattered sites, Alto Street, Airport, Industrial Park, other departmental enterprise funds, existing agreements that were in effect in 2000 that are continuing lease agreements. Those have been exempted, and any agreements that are subject to a restriction of their revenue source. And so in this dedication section of the municipal code, it is identified rail yard property, Santa Fe Estates, Tierra Contenta, and the airport are the 4 areas. And then these are specific properties that we're also talking about.
And then to add to that, keeping in mind that none of these properties or leases are providing any proceeds to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So as you look at this slide here, this sort of talks to you about the last 3 years of revenue that we have received based upon our finance committee, finance department has been tracking from a GRT standpoint and land sales or lease revenue. As Andrea said earlier, we receive our funding for this fund from 1% of GRT revenue and then land sales or lease agreements. And so if you look at this third column here, you'll see that there has been no land sale revenue, any windfall or revenue sources that have come to the Economic Development Fund. So in 2019, there were no land sales. In 2020, the Santa Fe Clay sale was actually sent to the Railroad Fund. And then in 2021, we are in the process of selling the Las Estrellas area of Santa Fe Estates. And those proceeds were moved to the General Fund in 2019. Originally, we're going to go to the Economic Development Fund. So there are no land sales currently in 2021 where we will see any proceeds to the Economic Development Fund. What you do see here is the GRT revenue for the last 3 years, and the 2021 is an estimate. As you may know, we are increasing our GRT revenue, so that number may change, but that's the GRT revenue, and it's not subject to proceeds to the Housing Trust Fund, but the lease revenue is. And as you can see that we've had some decrease in our lease revenue from year to year. And I'm working on a study with my team to figure out what the gap is in this lease revenue, but according to Ms. Ladd's memo that she wrote about the Housing Trust Fund, this is where we would start to take money to put into the fund. So of the 220, half of that would be about $110,000. That's what we would contribute to the Housing Trust Fund, and I'll have to figure out how to fill that gap going forward. So I wanted to give you a little overview of the what we budgeted in the fund from the fund. It's a little wordy here, but I can take you through easily. There are only 7 categories of how we disperse the fund based upon our Angelou plan. And starting with LEDA business expansion projects, I'd show the first this current year budget and what I've budgeted for the next year. Business acceleration and incubation, that's really helping businesses grow. We estimated this year we're spending about $225,000, and we're budgeting for the next year $250,000. Job training and development, those are fee-for-service contracts. They've stayed the same. Strategic economic initiatives, that is to build in for an upcoming strategic economic plan, which I have budgeted for the next year. And then entrepreneurship, that's investing in entrepreneur activities to engage our local community and to foster growth and innovation. And then broadband architecture analysis, we had originally had no money in our fund for broadband. We did have a capital outlay that has been used for public Wi-Fi. And so I have put in $100,000 into budget for next year to sort of continue that public Wi-Fi initiative if I'm not able to get money from the federal government. And then lastly is industry cluster development. We had spent a lot on just making sure that we are maintaining our industry cluster and diversifying the economy. And I just budgeted $30,000 for this coming new fiscal year because we're hoping that some of the federal money will be able to supplement that. In bold here, you'll see that my total budget from the fund was $904,000. And then currently for FY22, I'm estimating $974,000. That could change if I'm taking out money for lease agreements and for the Housing Trust Fund. So a little breakdown on some of those numbers. Here are the fee-for-service contracts that we work on. The Business Incubator, This has been a 21-year relationship. YouthWorks has been a 6-year contract relationship. Make Santa Fe has been a 4-year relationship of investment. And then we had a program, Mix Santa Fe, which was a 10-year relationship. And then we converted over to a food accelerator, which started in 2020 that has a 4-year contract. So this is where our funds go to promote and excel community and business engagement and to increase our GRT, which we can get on the back end. This is just an example of the LEDA program. Some folks know about LEDA, but it's a local economic development act, which allows us to work with the state to promote business and community benefits with job growth and expansion. And we can use these funds through this economic development fund. We can use them to invest in business expansion through lease agreements, constructions, et cetera, to help generate job growth and business expansion in the city. And I will talk a little bit about this further down in my slides, but I wanted to just give you a sense of the LEDA overview. This next slide will give you a sense of where this money has been going. So right now we have these 6 clients that we're working on with LEDA investments. They're not just one-time investments. It's over a number of years. And the amount that we've invested and the number of years that it's invested over. And so right now we have these 6, Meow Wolf, Santa Fe Spirits, Second Street Brewery, Descartes, La Porta, and Marty's Meals. And then right now I'm targeting 4 business expansions in FY22 and 3 new business relocation opportunities, which I will use some of the fund money to support. So if I am losing some of our funding dollars, I have to consider that from a standpoint of the relocation, but I will try to spend as much money as I can on the business expansion.
Rich, can I ask you a quick question on that last slide?
Yes, sir, Counselor.
So the 10 years for Meow Wolf, for example, is that 10 years from this fiscal year, or was that the total when it started?
That's a good question. It's from when it started, and I should have put the dates in. So Meow Wolf came on before me, and I think it was 2018. So 2018 to 2028 is the span that they'll get that. So it's $10,000 a year.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the span of the time period. So again, Santa Fe Spirits I think came on in 2018, and the brewery Descartes I think was 2019. La Puerta was just last year. They had an expansion, and Marty's Meals was in 2019 for 10 years.
Okay, thank you. What was the Santa Fe Spirits one?
Santa Fe Spirits, I think it was 2018. I think that's the date. I wasn't to hear the time of that expansion, but I think it was 2018, and I can get back to you on the.
Okay, thank you.
So moving forward, as we said, that we know that there's a resolution going through that says to share 50% of our land sales lease revenue to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I think tonight, item N, we're going to discuss that in detail. So I won't sort of rehash it here, but this last piece here says that approximately $150,000 from this fund currently for the next fiscal year could be extracted from our budget to be proceeds for the Housing Trust Fund. And so I think from the standpoint of what Chairwoman Romero-Worth asked me, what do we see money coming in so that we can make up for it, is that right now we're hoping that in the future, let's say in the next 2 years, that we are preparing the Northwest Quadrant parcel for sale. That's approximately appraisal value of $3.2 million. That would provide a greater windfall for us over a number of years and also support the Housing Trust Fund. That has not come to the City Council yet, and it's probably another 18 months in the making before we'll be able to really get all the details together and get it out for a possible private sale. New leases that are not in the rail yard, airport, or Tierra Contenta, those are potential sales revenues for us and potential growth areas. We see that if we invest the money that could come from the Northwest Quadrant into new parcels to redevelop, it could be new leases for us in the coming years from that standpoint. So when I look at the potential growth areas beside these sales, again, we're hoping that if we can stimulate the economy, it'll increase our GRT and growth from there. And so our 1% number, which is a static number, but it will grow based upon new sales from GRT. And then reduce fee-for-service contracts. This is probably the first area that I will have to look at in the coming fiscal year if we are looking at up to 150,000 in revenue share because of the contracts I showed you earlier that we have no other place to put them. And so we'll have to renegotiate some of our contracts in order for them to be whole for the next fiscal year. Some of them have already been signed. Again, large windfall from the Northwest Quadrant. I said that we looking at a strategy of using that windfall to invest in other areas of the city to redevelop so that we can have new lease income and hopefully business relocation or expansion that allow us to find more GRT growth or increased lease agreements from that standpoint. Lastly, we are working to become a lot more stricter on the management of our current and future lease agreements. We have a lot of lease agreements that are many years old and that we want to modernize them so that we have greater control over them and make sure that we know what the agreement is, how much money is coming in, and how it's going to go out. So we had an asset development associate who's in charge of lease management, and we're just putting it on our Munis system so that we can get a greater control over our leases, keeping in mind that we have leases all over the place. We have little buildings, big buildings, internal pieces, staff buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'm finished. If you have any questions, I'm open for questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's see. Am I unmuted? Yes. All right, I believe Councilor Garcia, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich, for the presentation. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Couple questions I've got. On the slide where you break down the revenue of how the fund is kind of develops its resources in the three different categories, and you've given kind of a 3-year overview. The leases went down, I think the past couple of years, $140,000. Are we leasing less? What is the reason for such a drastic decrease in those revenues?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's a question I'm still sort of resolving, and we had hired our new person on just to get to that point. We hit a pandemic that dropped a lot, but it's the stricter lease management. I'm trying to get my hands around why those lease numbers have changed. We didn't change the numbers, so to speak. We've been trying to increase or provide more measurement and income from it. So I don't have an answer for you right now on why that happened, but I did ask Lauren to do some research on that so I can get back to everybody on the gap analysis between 2019 and 2021.
Okay, great. Still with that same kind of slide, you had projected that leases might decrease by $110,000 if land were to be sold. So I'm assuming that would be because property that's currently being leased out, we wouldn't be able to generate the revenues from those sales because the way that they currently stand, the proceeds would go to another source. Is that where you're coming up with that number? Is that how it's kind of arrived?
Oh, that's a good question. Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, no, I'm saying that the estimate is 220,000, but if we're sharing it with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we would only receive 110,000 and the remaining would go to the Housing Trust Fund. So it still would be at the 220 total. It's just that we would have to share that amount. So for my fund in FY22, I might see a decrease of 110,000 in my fund for use for economic development, because that money will be funneled to the Housing Trust Fund. So the lease amount won't change. It's the disbursement that's going to change.
Okay, so the disbursements from leases. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, because if we're selling the property, then I'm just trying to figure out how we're arriving at that number. If the leases go, you're having to split. I thought we were only splitting proceeds of land sales, which would fall into that second category in that sense. You would get that revenue from the I think it was the middle column where that has the revenue has been zero. I would have thought that the revenue would fall into there, not in the leases portion of the present or that table.
No, Councilor Garcia, no, it is from both land and lease agreements. So it's both those.
Okay.
categories.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
You mentioned that historically land sales have been $300,000, but on the chart you showed us, there hasn't been sales for the last 3 years. And I guess just inquiring where we got that number from, because on my time of the governing body, we haven't sold any land. Well, we've sold Santa Fe Clay.
Yeah.
And so I guess what other properties historically have we sold that have generated that much in revenue?
Councilor Garcia, there shouldn't be. I'm looking at the slide. There's no land sales for 300,000 that came to my fund. That 300,000 I think you're thinking of is the GRT revenue. So that's the first column. It says 300,000. I can show you this.
Maybe you should bring the slide back up, Rich.
So this first column is GRT revenue. That's the 383. Second column, land sales.
I wasn't talking about that slide. I apologize. Okay. I think it might have been on slide 6 or 7. No, next slide maybe.
7, Lita.
No, not that one. No, next slide maybe.
4.
There you go. You hit it.
Oh.
No, slide 9.
Okay. Oh, slide 9.
Yeah, and second bullet.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I'm sorry, that's a good question. This is from the past from Alexandra Ladd when she wrote the FIR. She said historically. So historically just means in the past, we've had land sales of about that amount. But that's why I showed you that slide that said over the last 3 years, we have not had any land sales at all. But historically, there has been land for sale.
Right. Okay. And I guess thank you for that. And so it's just bigger, broader picture historic. I was just kind of wondering because I would think, land is a limited resource that we have.
Yes.
We can't every year be selling land. To me, that's not a sustainable source of revenue for us. So with that being said, what properties do we have that we might be looking at selling that would affect funding this particular fund?
The only property we have for sale is the Northwest Quadrant, is really the only property of land for sale that comes right now into the Economic Development Fund. It used to be the Las Estrellas, Santa Fe Estates, but in 2019, there was a resolution to move that revenue to the general fund.
Okay. So, but that wouldn't affect this ordinance change wouldn't affect those revenues. So what other revenues might impact this fund? And I guess the question better is framed as what properties are we exploring at selling that would affect this fund?
Councilor Garcia, these are the ones to explore. We only have one.
Okay.
We only have one. There, as I said in the earlier slide, there are many properties that are. I'm trying to look for the slide. Sorry.
Okay. Well, and I guess the point I'm trying to make. So we've got those list of properties. Those ones are that's kind of the universe right now, and those are that's the universe that potentially could affect this fund some way, whether it's this year, next year, or
these are exempt
5 years.
Oh, these are all exempt from my fund.
Okay. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around if we're not selling any properties that would have an impact on the fund, how is it ultimately going to have that negative impact unless it is a property that is being leased that we generate the resources? And that's probably the one I guess factor that if it is being leased and we do sell it, we're not going to take in those lease revenues.
Correct.
Am I correct? Okay, cool.
That's
Awesome.
correct, yeah. So we will be affected by the loss of funding because we're sharing 50% of the lease income.
Okay, great. Thank you for all the clarification, Richard. Really helped me to
Sure.
wrap my head
No
around
worries.
all of this.
Sure.
No other questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Counselor Cassett Sanchez and Counselor Garcia, will you just take your hand down just so I don't get confused? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Rich, for the presentation. So I'm sorry, I'm again also just trying to kind of wrap my head around this. For the loss of revenue, I mean, I basically see it in, we have two options there. We either decrease our spending in the program or we find other revenue. And at this point, you know, what is likely to happen if we do go ahead and approve this ordinance change? What are the real ramifications that we're looking at here?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, the real ramifications, because the revenue is incremental, is that I have to forecast how much we will get in a year and then possibly reduce our FY22 contracts by a allocation. So let's say if it's $110,000 in potential FY22 lease revenue, then I would have to allocate that over my fee-for-service contracts for the next year. So I'd make a notice to say that you're going to reduce your allocated funding for that year with new amendments, et cetera, by, let's say, $15,000 each, because these are ongoing long-term contracts. But that would be a notice that I have to probably do in June to them as we look at the forecast for the year.
So sorry.
He didn't like my answer.
So I'm sorry, that really threw me off.
He's not a fee-for-service contract, I know that.
Scared you.
You terrified me. It's because my child is now home. Can you bring up, there was the slide that listed those long-term contracts. Can you please bring those up?
Yeah, let me just find it and I'll open up this slide. So, share screen. So here are our current fee-for-service contracts. There are 5 major ones. Well, actually, there's 4. I'm sorry. The mixed contract was ended in 2019, but we have 4 major contracts: the Business Incubator, YouthWorks, Make Santa Fe, and Creative Startups Food Accelerator. There are many more smaller initiatives that I work on. Those will all be part of this reduction allocation as it relates to entrepreneurship or sponsorships of programs to stimulate the economy, et cetera. But these are major numbers that will be reviewed. So first tranche will be those smaller initiatives that we work on in our office, and then the second tranche will be these ongoing fee-for-service contracts that will probably have some reduction at some point.
Okay, thank you, Rich. I think, and this kind of, I feel like it's continuing to boil down into really understanding what does the impact mean for the community? And I guess that might be questions for these who we're funding, is this understanding of what does that mean for the services they're provided? What are the outputs that we are not getting? And I think that that's probably really important information for us to be given as we are making this decision. And so how might we go about, it's kind of, I don't want to tell our funders, hey, we're cutting your funding if we're not actually cutting your funding, but
Yeah.
What does it really mean if we do? And so I'm curious how we might start to get some of that information and really understanding what is the on the ground impact of this change. Do you have ideas there, Rich, of how we might go about that?
No, sorry, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett. Yeah, so keep in mind, as I said, there are two buckets that I have to do the reduction based upon the forecast. Is that I'll look at all these ad hoc initiatives that I've been doing to stimulate the economy, work on recovery, and then I'll go to the service contracts, and then I would have to sort of say, okay, if I pull aside let's say I take $60,000 that I've used for ad hoc initiatives. So that leaves me, let's say, approximately 50,000. So it might mean that each of these contracts will lose potentially $10,000 in funding. Keep in mind, though, that I might be able to make it up just for this year or next year through federal grant funding. So I might be able to supplement it with the ARP funding so that they're not, they at least have a year to sort of negotiate or not renegotiate, but really sort of reconfigure how they would do their work with a loss. So it might be an FY23 where they potentially would be affected.
Okay, thank you for that, Rich. And then for these ad hoc programs that you were discussing that are intended to stimulate the economy, I'm not an economist, so I can't, I have a hard time thinking about, well, then how do we try to measure what that looks like in terms of stimulating our economy? If we take away those programs, what are we potentially, losing in that sense? Do you have any thoughts on how we might be able to get to some estimation? I know that it's projecting into the future and there's no guarantees, but how we might be able to get some estimation of what that would look like.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Casas-Sanchez, that's a very good question, and it's hard to extrapolate right now because the smaller programs are, there's sponsorships of events, there's sponsorships of chamber activities, there's sponsorships of entrepreneurship. And so what could happen, because there's soft and hot dollars involved, is that, we could have a loss of social capital in the future because people didn't have a way to be able to network together because they depended on some of this largesse. Again, we could have a reduction in entrepreneurship and innovation because we have been sponsoring ways for folks to seed them to get to that next level. Again, the third way would be that we also might see a loss of opportunities for soft skill training because we are not helping to fund areas where, we have these programs that say we're building soft skill training so you can find a job, or looking at businesses to say, as we jumpstart a business, we'd love to just fund a job training person, a person in a job training program so that you can, make your way over the next 6 or 9 months. So it's a little difficult right now for me to extrapolate what that impact will be. Though I can say potentially, I'd say that, if you did a 20x for the amount that I invest, that would be what we would probably bring back in economic impact and economic revenue for the city. So if I'm investing, 60,000, we're talking 1.2. So that would be where I'd say, from my standpoint, that would give you a sense of what the impact might be.
Thanks, Rich. Now, are those the ones that we may be able to cover with federal dollars this year?
Yes, potentially, yeah, we could cover with federal, both of these. Like the first tranche, we could probably cover with federal dollars for the next fiscal year. And then in the FY23, we'd have to sort of figure out, are we about to make that land sale of Northwest Quadrant? That gives us a windfall to sort of sustain it. And then these contracts, again, I could make up for the balance with federal dollars if we have to reduce them down. So it's not an immediate concern, but it is a future concern as we pull out of the economic malaise.
And then in terms of like other funding sources, other partnerships that we might explore, I know with some of the public health work and community services work that there are different foundations and philanthropic organizations that provide that assistance. Are we already working with some? Maybe we're tapped out, but two, if not, are there potential other opportunities that we could explore partnerships there?
Madam Chair, Councilor Casas-Sanchez, yes, that's a very good point, that we can rely on some of the foundations and nonprofits. Keep in mind that some of these foundations and nonprofits are already investing in these, basically in the fee-for-service contracts. They're not necessarily investing in the ad hoc pieces. That's us using our plan to sort of figure out ways to stimulate the economy. So we would also want to go back to them to say, is there a way to capture that loss while we're trying to reconfigure how the city can keep up with the number we thought was a good estimate to keep some of these programs whole.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Definitely a pretty
Mhm.
complex and nuanced and intricate decision, and a lot of ripples that come from it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to explore this with us. I don't believe I have any further questions or barking animals at the moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rich, for the presentation. Can we go back to that fee for services contract slide?
Sure.
I just want to break that down even further, because there was a point, not even just last year, but when we had to tighten our belts on our budget, these groups did get cuts.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if the amounts you're showing now, are those the original amounts or what we ended up reducing their contracts?
Madam Chair, Council Villarreal, that's a very good question. So at the last moment, I'll say in the middle of the summer, we were able to reinstate most of these contracts. We did not reinstate the Youth Works one. One, because we had run out of funding ourselves, but we are in the process of sending an RFP out for that. But keeping in mind that on the Youth Works side, we did fund them through our emergency food program. So they were able to continue their food service job training program through the pandemic food service program that we did. So we used FEMA funding to supplement them. But we did ultimately get our funding back. I think it was in July. And so we're actually still trying to renew contracts going forward. So FY22, these are the estimates for SFBI and YouthWorks and MAKE, and then Creative Startups is already have been going. This is their second cohort of the Food Accelerator, so they have been going strong. But the other two large ones for the Business Incubator, we are now in the process of trying to get their contracts new. So in the next month, you'll see those contracts come through the City Council.
Right. Okay. I guess the other thing that I'm trying to figure out is we haven't funded Mix Santa Fe for a while, since
Right.
2019. And are you planning on reinstating that in this following fiscal year?
It's a possibility. As I said, I talked to when I was explaining to Councilor Cassett Sanchez is that I'm looking for all kinds of ad hoc ways to stimulate the economy, and one of the things that will be lost as we look at reduced revenue is business social networking. And so Mix was a very large component and a best in class for business social networking. And so I put this in here because it's just one of the ways where in 2019 we were doing fees for service contracts, that it might come back in the new year, but it could be something that we really can't consider. And I put it in here because it was a larger number than a $5,000 sponsorship.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what I'm thinking about is some of these areas we haven't funded at this level or even at all a couple years. I've heard great things about the Creative Startups Food Accelerator. I think that is something that's important. But I guess what I'm saying is that by reducing these by a small percentage, it would be interesting for that conversation to be had with these groups to make the connection to housing and the need for housing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that we're investing in potential housing initiatives through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's where it's going. So it kind of like they're all connected.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't, if we weren't able to keep people here and actually have a housing, viable housing, then none of this matters, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So they're connected. And I guess this wouldn't be the only area that we could potentially make reductions. There's other areas that you listed. So it's not like these folks should necessarily worry. We haven't funded Mix Santa Fe at that level anyway. Yeah, I guess I just don't see it as like, oh, fee for service contracts are all going to be cut. That's not how I see it at all. They may be reduced and make sense, make adjustments that make sense, but then there's other potential areas. So I guess I just think of it as a bigger, broader piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I think you're right. You know, I do support providing funding for that Portable Housing Trust Fund. And I think you're correct that we're just one fund of many that could support this initiative. And so Councilor Romero-Worth asked me to sort of talk about what this fund does. And we're probably one of the smaller ones. And so that's why it might look like a big giant red mark that's coming at us. But there are other ways that that fund could be funded up. And it's just that our department has a public facing role. And so when you look at it, these are areas that, just so you're aware of that, you're right. If we don't have housing, you can't do business expansion. You can't do business location. So it is important to look at the housing as the horse and some of these activities as the cart. So I'm in agreement that we do need to look at both of them and also look at others. So.
Great, thanks. The other thing that you had mentioned, but I can't remember which slide it was, you said these particular funding lease revenue sources don't currently go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think it was one of the
yes, let's see. Let's see, I'll show that to you. Here you go. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so these are properties that are potential properties, parcels for sale at some point in the future, not now, but in the future, that potentially could provide some proceeds to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's just that they don't point to the Economic Development Fund.
And they currently, like what you put in the parentheses, that's where it's going?
That's where they point, correct.
And I'm wondering how many of those can be altered for that purpose.
I think that's just a matter of passing a resolution to make that move happen. But
okay, just curious about that, to think about that more.
It's also, though, if I can interject, a question of where those funds are going right now, you know? So all of this money is spoken for in some way or another. So it's a question of how we move it around.
Right. Right. So you'd want to ask the different fund owners, you know, how they use the fund proceeds when they come in. But these have not been sold, so the money is not there. But these are funds that they would point to if they were.
Right. Okay, that's all I was thinking about more. That's all. Thank you, Rich.
Sure.
I have a couple questions if there aren't any others from the committee. And I don't know, recognizing that most of us weren't around in 1998 or in 2000, even though I have a theory. I'm wondering if anybody knows the history. So the two resolutions, the 1998-49 and 2000-16, was the 1998 one the one that put the 1% of GRT into this fund? And I'm guessing that the leasing of city lands came from the 2000-16. Is that the way that broke out? Do you know? Does anybody know?
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Andrea to answer that question.
Yeah, Madam Chair, councilors, so I was not able to obtain the 1998 resolution today. It's on microfiche. So I don't actually know the breakdown. I just know that that was the resolution that established the fund, but I couldn't track exactly what that resolution and ordinance stated.
Okay, and the 2001, were you able to pull that one? Did that add funding or no?
I was not able to pull that one either, Madam Chair.
Okay, so here's my theory. Do we know what year was the Angelou Economic Development Study done? You mentioned that
Sure,
briefly, Rich.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that was 2004.
Well, so later. Okay,
Later.
so then my theory is totally blown. All right, and the Angelou study is still the economic development plan that you referenced that we still rely on as our plan. Is that true?
Yes, Madam Chair, that we rely on it. Most of the programs, or if not all the programs, have some connection to all of the different categories of the Angelou strategic plan. So as I showed in the slide, categorizing entrepreneurship and LEADA projects and innovation, et cetera, they all have a connection to the Angelou plan. And so I'm hoping to update that for the new century.
Right. I mean, that was a big deal when it happened.
No.
And I can imagine that the council at the time, my theory was they must have wanted to provide a way of funding some of the provisions or some of the things that it provided for. And so, it'd be interesting to know the history, because I wonder why, this fund had the 1% from GRT, and then it has the lease and land sales. Like what historically led to, I mean, did they all come together in one resolution that's what the funding stream was, or did those come over time to increase it and with priorities that the councils were trying to, I don't know, it'd be sort of interesting to know how that evolved.
Yeah.
Madam
Chair,
Chair.
I was going to ask if we could, Andrea first, if we could have Miss Alexandra Ladd. She was in the economic development and has been part of the city for a while. So she may have some history around that, because what I wanted to say is that the Angelou plan, while it was published in 2004, it probably was started in 2002. So it takes a while to create a large plan, because you have community management, market research, data, et cetera. So maybe Ms. Ladd may have some insight during her early tenure with the
Yeah,
city.
it would just be interested if you, Alexander, if you have any context to add to this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rich. So the ordinance numbers in Rich's presentation are the citations in the city code. To Andrea's point, we didn't actually go as far as pulling out from the microfiche, which we could certainly do. But the way I was reading the reference in the code, so I could be slightly wrong about this, but I think the resolution set the fund up, and then the first ordinance in 2000 established the GRT revenue stream, and it started at 25%, and then it increased by 25% each year. So it would have been at the full 1% in 2004 when the Angelou plan was put together. So racking my memory back to 2004, it was a fairly expeditious process. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, there were lots of fun, fancy events with free hors d'oeuvres. But I believe it was within a 12-month period that all of the studies were done and the plan was drafted.
And yeah, and I'd just be curious, when did we add the lease, so you would think 1% of our share of GRT would be pretty significant dollars. So what caused us to add, in addition, the sale of city-owned land and the leases? What was, I'm just wondering historically.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we would probably have to look at that original enabling legislation, because it possibly had a plan to do that as well. All I can tell you is from the housing perspective, I started in 1999, and we shared our CDBG entitlement with economic development. And then shortly after I started, we stopped doing that because economic development had these other sources of funding.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I was going to say, I suspect that possibly the land sales and lease was added on because of LEADA investments. I think that, we wanted to have a larger, Andrea might have an answer to that.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to explain that the citation for the dedications include both the GRT and the lease and land sale, all adopted in 2000.
Okay, all together.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, the reason I bring this up is I think it's important because, so in that day, the Angelou report was a big deal, back to the parties and the free hors d'oeuvres. And now the big thing that we're all focused on is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, right? So it's just sort of interesting to see as we evolve how priorities change and our focus, what we're dialing in on changes. And I just think here we have an example of that. And I'm curious, Rich, so if we, given what you've told us tonight, if we were to amend the bill that's moving its way through the process so that it doesn't take from the leases, but only takes from any sale of land, we wouldn't be hitting your budget the way you've described tonight. Am I correct about that?
That's correct, because I won't use the word anticipate, but we are looking at Northwest Quadrant as a land sale, and it's a very large proceeds that come from that. So if we take the lease income out, it would not hit my budget. But when the land sale comes through for Northwest Quadrant, it's almost like a balloon payment that, approximately $3.25 million in appraised value. That is a very large balloon payment that could happen over the next 3 years that could be shared with the Affordable Housing Trust. So while we'll be dripping in with our leases, let's say it's $100,000 a year for a couple of years, a balloon payment of $3 million is a large, accelerated payment that goes in without affecting, the currently what we're doing here in the Economic Development Department.
Yeah, and I guess I had thought, my original thought was maybe 50% was too high, right? That maybe we should move it to 10%. But now I'm starting to think that what we should do is take the lease revenue out of the amount, the 50% amount that would go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and just focus on any sale of land going forward, especially because I think when we were first thinking about this too, we didn't realize the commitment that the administration was making through the budget process in doing the budget adjustment request and, potential budgeting that we'll be looking at next week. So I think we sit in a different place, but we're still looking for the funding that's going to get us that consistent level every year. And this, of course, is not consistent, as we've seen from your slides. It varies. We haven't had any land sales in the last, what was it, 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
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 Okay, and then I had one other thought. What was it? Oh, so when you say, when you were talking about making up the revenue from federal dollars, that's only possible this year and because of the stimulus money, right? So it's not gonna, if we continue to hit that portion of the leases, we don't know where that money will come from in the out years, because that would happen every single year. That you just know that we might, because of the stimulus money, be able to make it up with federal dollars, say in the next year or two.
Yeah, Madam Chair, you're correct. And it gets more complex from there, because the money that I might extract from the federal dollars will not go to the small businesses that I was setting aside for business relief. So you're correct. It's a one-time payment from the federal dollars, unless, the economy goes down the tubes again and then there's more money put in, but it would be one time, whereas the leases is recurring income, but the federal dollar. That's exactly the right word I was looking for. It's not recurring. That federal money is not recurring. It's at this point money that we have because of stimulus money that the feds have given us. So, okay. Just trying to think if there was, and when you the list of contracts that you had talked about, the one, the Santa Fe Incubator contract, I do remember, to Councilwoman Villarreal's point about how we had, I think
I want to say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we did lower that amount, and there was incredible pushback about what we were doing to that funding and to that work. And I think we ended up restoring it back to the same level the following year. And so, you know, that one I already know is going to be not well tolerated, shall we say. All right. Anything else you would add? Anything else? Alexandra, you're raising your hand.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would also add that the ordinance allows for the revenues from specific transactions to be directed at specific projects. So there's sort of like this other clause in the list of where the provisions are. So that's, you know, that's also something to keep in mind. The lease revenues could stay in place for the Economic Development Fund, and then when there was an upcoming land sales, the council could decide to dedicate a portion or all of the revenues from a specific land sale into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as well.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, that happened with the Las Estrellas Santa Fe Estates piece in 2019. The council approved it going out of the fund and into the general fund to services, but also to support Midtown redevelopment. So Ms. Latt's correct that it can be changed at some point. But
okay, interesting. Andrea, did you have anything else to add before we wrap up here?
Madam Chair, councilors, no, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this. I think this gives us a much better understanding of the universe that we're trying to tap into and the impact that it would have. And yeah, now we need to figure out what we can live with. So I appreciate the presentation.
sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We are moving on now to the consent agenda. And the first item was item A, pulled by Councilor Garcia. And that is the request for approval of an amendment to contract 20-0396. Sorry, can't read in the amount of $57,579 for the senior volunteer programs. Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry, Gino, for making you wait. I pulled this item because I do have to recuse myself from the item as I work for the federal agency that this fund goes to supporting. So with that, I am going to sign off, and if somebody wouldn't mind alerting me when we get to the next agenda item.
Sure. All right, do we have a motion on this?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilor Cassett Sanchez, a second from Councilwoman Villarreal. And Jennifer, if you could take the roll on this item.
Of course. Councilor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councilor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. And if we can just give Councilor Garcia a minute to come back.
Texted him in case.
Okay, good. I was just looking for my texter. All right, Councilor Garcia is back, and we will move on then to LMNOP. We'll move on to M. And I believe, Councilor Garcia, you also, among others, pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and if I can, just for anybody listening, an ordinance amending, oh wait, nope, that's the wrong one, hold on. A resolution establishing a work plan for improving access to affordable housing opportunities for residents of the city of Santa Fe. Now, Councilor Garcia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pulled this item because I do have an amendment to the resolution that I would like to present to the committee tonight for consideration. The purpose of the amendment is to begin this process of developing our plans for how to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund with a governing body meeting, what I would consider kind of maybe a strategy session. And this is where maybe I would like some support and input from my governing body colleagues in how to potentially strengthen this, because the intention behind this is whenever there are strategic plans developed, there usually is some type of action plan, strategic brainstorming session that happens firsthand. And then you go off, do the work, which is currently proposed, and then you go back and report out in regards to the work that was developed. So the intention, as I mentioned, is to have the governing body meet firsthand, to be able to allow governing body members to provide their input in regards to what topics we should be looking at the committee level, and look at if there needs to be anything that might be time sensitive in the sense. I know that there's the topic of establishing potentially a geo bond, which would be a time sensitive issue because we do have a timetable we would have to work within to review and approve, should that be the route that the governing body would want to go forth in. And so with that kind of sets the framework and kind of parameters in regards to having everybody come together, the entire governing body come together at first. The entire governing body has the opportunity to present their topics. The public is able to hear what's being presented. The governing body can understand what is getting farmed out to what committee. And that way, governing body members could also participate in committee meetings should they not be part of that particular committee. So to get back to the geo bond example, because I don't sit on the finance committee, and that would probably sit within that committee, or maybe even another committee, I would like to understand where it's being farmed out and how we're going to move forward with this. This would also help with how the staff is going to support such recommendations. I know that was a question that came up during the finance committee meeting in regards to how are we going to delegate which staff is going to support particular issues. And during this initial convening of governing body members, we can begin to set those parameters and framework as well. I think it's just the most logical way for us to begin this process. We convene, we break up, we do the research, we do all the work, then we go back, come back together and reconvene and understand what was talked about during all these committee hearings and committee processes. With that, so I'm open to stand for any questions or recommendations, comments, concerns in regards to the proposed amendment.
Councillor Villarreal, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Garcia, I know we were initially talking about that, both you and I, about a work session so that we're all on the same page to get kind of an idea of like short-term and long-term possibilities, and then prioritizing, and then it would go to committees that were specific to those topic areas. And I guess, and I see where you're going with this. I'm just trying to figure out, let's see, you said that this would, that special meeting that the governing body shall develop focus areas for revenue sources. Do you mean like priority areas for revenue sources?
Yeah, just focus area. What I meant by that language is the focus areas of the revenue sources. So for example, looking at a geo bond, looking at any other type of tax revenue that could be allocated. Because I know, for example, now that the cannabis law has passed, that's everybody has been in support of providing revenues from those taxes towards affordable housing. How is that going to impact? And that's what I mean by the focus areas in regards to what committee is going to undertake what particular topic. And I guess maybe topic is a better word. I mean, I come from a world of strategic planning, so focus area is the word that we usually use. If topic is the better word, and it's more germane to this situation, I'm open to that. I like I said, it's more so having us come together to really develop the ideas in regards to what do we want to look at. I know that there has been expressed in the past that we can recommend topics to the chairs to look at, but I think this is an opportunity for us to come together to really provide the initial recommendations firsthand in a process where we're all sitting at the table and understanding whom is recommending what, because there might be an instance where I'm going to go back to the geo bond example because I keep using that 3 or 4 counselors say, I'm really interested in that. And the rest of the governing body says, nope, doesn't interest me. Then those 3 or 4 can form their coalition to work on that. It allows for the governing body to come together as a whole, figure out who wants to work on what, participate in the committee process, in that open and transparent process. And then as we move to the governing body, what I would call the findings and conclusions portion, we can then move forward as whether it's that initial coalition of wanting to meet with 4 to look at geo bond, however that works, whatever it is, we can understand who wants to work on what, because I think what we're running into is a free-for-all, for lack of better words. Everybody is saying, oh, affordable housing is important to me, so I want to do this, or I want to do this. And that to me is, it has the opportunity to leave out governing body members from the initial development process, because then what happens is it then gets introduced and you have to work within that framework of whatever is introduced at the moment. And to me, I think you don't want to, that's the bad way to approach policy, because then you have to potentially reshape it all. And if you can move forward with shaping it before it hits the committee process, to me, that's a better use of time. But hopefully that answered your question. I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Councilor Rivera, you weren't in the finance meeting, but I had brought up that if those of us are not chairs on committees, then how do some of the things that we want to consider that may not be expressed by the chair, and how do we get that on the table for consideration? And there's been no pathway other than, oh, you could tell the chairs and they would consider it, but that doesn't guarantee it, especially if they're not focused on that. So that's why I would support this amendment. I just need to understand how it all works together, and also that we're not overextending staff with a bunch of ideas, but simultaneously that we also are equitably allowing for counselors, especially those, not just one, say one person wants something, but no one else really is aligned with them. That's a different story. But if there's a few people that are interested in a certain way or option, and we need to have staff to support, or to have support to research it, that if we're not a chair, we don't get that opportunity. So I'm kind of struggling with this piece. Like, I don't know what is the best way to express this so that those of us that are not chairs on those standing committees, that we are also allowed to be part of the prioritization process. I'll stop there.
Okay, I do have some thoughts on this and about what's sort of envisioned, but we'll go to questions. Councilor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Garcia. I'm going kind of back and forth. I think, and it might just be because it's April, and I'm thinking about how many meetings we have and how many meetings our staff. I mean, Alexandra, are you in 4 meetings this week too? You were in finance. So, and then I know that we're hitting budget hearings. So I am wondering if there is I'm trying to figure out if, because I definitely appreciate the idea of like, how do we all come together and say, hey, this is what I'm really interested in working on, but how do we do it efficiently? And I guess kind of one of the things that you said, Councilor Garcia, is that if 3 or 4 people are interested in it and the rest of the governing body isn't interested in it, then they can kind of go start working on it. But I think for me, the purpose of this is, at this juncture, I am pretty much open to most suggestions, and I want the committee process to really have the opportunity. So I would be disappointed if some councilors kind of jump the gun before we all had, because that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're trying to figure out how we get around our quorum issues and still all work together. So I think,
And Councilor,
oh, so go ahead.
I didn't mean that folks would immediately, if once we hit this brainstorming session, governing bodies would go work on their own immediately. We would still go through the committee process. Once we hit that findings process is where folks can then collaborate and work together. Because that would be completely disservice to the process. I think that's what this whole plan is trying to achieve, is to allow for everybody to participate in this process as we go through all the way through the recommendations, as we go through the process to where there is what is now currently proposed, the kind of gathering of folks. That would, in my opinion, should be the second. That way we can say, okay, this is what we come out with. Now, who wants to do what? And that's where folks, yes.
Thank you. That clarifies that. I was like, I don't know if we want to have a first gathering and then we're supposed to do the research. So it is kind of an interesting question. The way I also would hope that this process would work is that, I mean, almost similar to the discussion that we had with the economic development fund, that I have a feeling that as we start to look at things, it's going to lead to other things, it's going to lead to other things, it's going to lead to other things. And I would hate to, it's kind of like, how do we balance both the focus of here's the general topics that we know off the top of our head that we want to look at, but how do we also not restrict ourselves that organic process isn't happening? So I'm open to some form of this. I'm not sure if an additional special meeting, given the time of year and where our staff capacity is, and honestly where our council capacity is coming up on, this week, and then 3 weeks of budget hearings, and then within 30 days of this passing, we're looking at this hitting us the next week of another special governing body meeting. I'm almost wondering if there's some way that we can potentially gather information, that it might be an item on a governing body agenda, so we all have a moment to comment. But I think it would behoove us to not open up another 3-hour meeting where we sit there and discuss the merits of these proposals that we haven't even researched yet. I don't think it's a good use of our time. I don't think it's a good use of our staff time. So I think trying to find that balance of how exactly that same point, how do we all get to say, here are some of the ideas that I want to make sure we cover? How do we make sure that the public understands where they might be able to see this? And that might be something that we need to talk to our city clerk about, community engagement. How is this noticed? How do we get this information out? Is this part of our newsletters that we put out? And then, how do we all have that opportunity? And I'm not sure that we need another full special governing body meeting for that purpose. But that there is some type of hybrid of having that discussion, making sure that all council members are heard, making sure that information is out there, and we've delegated it out a bit, while also still looking at where I feel capacity might be, especially given the time of year. So those are my thoughts.
Madam Chair, if I may respond to that.
You know what? I'm going to go to Councilor Rivera, and then we'll loop around, because I think those were just thoughts, and I think we understand what you're trying to do.
But I feel there was maybe a misunderstanding that I want to clarify.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think Councilor Castesanchez mentioned that it would be here soon. I wouldn't anticipate this meeting to take place until May because as it stands, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't scheduled to be heard until what, the end of the month? The April 28th governing body meeting, if I'm not mistaken. So then if we passed it that night, we would have 30 days within that month. And if we pushed it out as far as May, I mean, we can look at what works best with everybody's calendar in May. And, you know, with that, this is an investment. And I think we could make the time. If we really care about this, we can make the time for this.
Councilor Garcia,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm just gonna, sorry, Madam Chair, do you mind if I respond?
No, go ahead.
I would like to request that there is a moving back from the implication that if we disagree with your process, we don't care about something. I think that you can say for yourself, I really care about this, and so I feel that this is an important way to do it, but I really disagree with the implication that if I don't agree with this process, it means I don't care about this. So I just want to ask that maybe that may not be what you were trying to say, but you know, I statements instead of we statements maybe might be a good thing to look at, because I don't like the implications that we understand what the rest of our governing body members are thinking, and that's how I perceive that. So thank you.
All right, we're going to go move on. Councilor Rivera, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I agree with what Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez just said, and just not to leave her out there alone, feel that I share the same feelings that Councilor Cassett Sanchez does. So just to put that out there. Councilor Garcia, I'm first trying to, I'm looking at your amendments page and just trying to sort of piece it all together, but your number one is to basically replace from that whole paragraph that really line 17 starts at right after Santa Fe. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so I worked with Jesse on this. This was his recommendation, how we move forward, because what the intention, as I mentioned, is to begin the process with meeting of the governing body before anything gets referred to the committee, the three standing committees. And
Right.
so the way the amendment sheet does, it does read a little wonky, but that's the end outcome.
All right, so then number two, which is also page 3, line 17, is that striking the shall and inserting to, is that to your number one amendment?
Let's see. So can you ask the question again, Counselor?
So on page 3, line 17, it says strike shall and insert in lieu thereof the word to.
Okay.
And I guess it would apply to both, but I assume if we accepted your number one, and that would take over after line 17, that the shall would be stricken and the word to put in there?
Yes. And maybe I can ask Jesse for some clarification, because he's the individual, that staff member that helped me with this amendment.
Yeah, that one I don't think is that big of a deal, but the next one, line 18, if we accept your number one amendment, then after recommendation, insert a period and strike the remainder, that goes back to the original language. So
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Councilor Rivera, would you like, sorry.
Yes, Jesse, can you help us?
Yeah, if Councilor Rivera, if you'd like, I can read sort of how it would sound with the amendments incorporated. Would that be helpful?
Sure.
Okay.
And Jesse, if you could tell us page and line where you're going to start.
Yeah, so I'll start on page 3, line 17. I apologize for the crying kids in the background, after Santa Fe. So
We've had barking dogs, we're good.
That's true. So City of Santa Fe shall hold a special meeting of the governing body within 30 days of the adoption of this resolution At this special meeting, the governing body shall develop focus areas for revenue sources that would achieve long-term, sustainable, predictable, equitable, and consistent funding for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, with the goals of expanding access to housing opportunities for all residents, regardless of income or type of housing needed. The focus areas developed at the special meeting shall be referred to the 3 City Council standing committees to take on the work of reviewing, evaluating, and assessing a broad set of proposals and recommendations.
Got it. Okay,
That's
thank you. That makes a lot more sense. And just for a few, I don't know if it's more work for you, but just for future, if we had it all on one document with the red lines or blue lines and who's making what amendment, that is super helpful to me, but I don't know if it means more work for you, but just a suggestion. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. So that clears that up. The next thing that I wanted to do was just ask Alexandra. She's been listening to everything that we've been talking about. She's been in the city for many, many, many years and had to deal with many governing bodies. You've heard what we've all talked about. You know what the needs are. Does this really meet what the counselors want to do and really is respectful of you and your time and what you're trying to accomplish in your department as well?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, thank you for the question. I hadn't really thought about it. I think we certainly need some sort of process to look at some of the recommendations that have come from our community members through the lens of both what's feasible at the city and what our capabilities are, and I'm thinking specifically in terms of some of the financial suggestions. I love the fact that everybody wants to talk about affordable housing. This has not always been the case. So this is super exciting, and there's a lot of motivation and a lot of interest. And I definitely respond to Councilor Garcia's desire to want to have the conversation together as a governing body. I know I speak for many of my fellow employees that this has been a rough 12 months for all of us. And so we don't have a lot of gas left in the tank right now as we try to kind of regroup and figure out what our next steps are. So I think I would just like to make sure we're very, very clear about what we want the outcome of the process to be, so we don't spend a lot of time kind of getting sidetracked by some of the many complexities that are interesting and important to talk about. But if we want it to be a truly productive process, I think that would be important to be very clear about that.
All right. And sorry, what do you sort of envision the time frames? Are we looking at starting meetings in May, and then how long after those meetings would we actually be able to start talking about funding and talk about housing needs and access to housing opportunities?
Councilor Rivera, can I answer that, or Alex, do you have an answer for that? I think this, maybe I can try and answer if it's okay, Councilor Rivera, and then if Alex wants to add to it. I think the idea is because we have funded the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for this fiscal year, and I'm told, I haven't seen the budget yet. I think we'll all be getting it, obviously sometime soon, because we start budget hearings on Tuesday, that there'll be money for the fund next year. So in my mind, we have just bought ourselves some time to vet through the committee process the various ideas that have come forward. So I don't see this as, something that we have to do in the next 60 to 90 days, right? I think this is going to be kind of the work that we're going to be engaged in probably for the rest of the year. and maybe longer for some of these things, because I think some of the things that have come forward to us are timing questions about when they'll be ready to bring forward. So the way Councilor Garcia mentioned time sensitivity, as though we need to hurry up in some of these things, I think there are also questions about when will we have the best chance of success, and when will we have all the information we need in order to act on some of these things. And so, like, for instance, the cannabis, I don't know that we know right now what kind of money that's going to bring, and certainly there won't be any money to bring for a while the state works out how that policy gets implemented and how the revenue starts to be collected so it can be dispersed. So anyway, that's my attempt at that. Alexandra, did you want to add to that?
Madam Chair, I think you articulated that very well. The pressure on the timeline would be for the next fiscal year to try to secure some funding sources so that our next budget cycle we're going into, we have some identified sources.
So, and when you say next, I think what we're talking about, so next week we start FY22 budget hearings. And so realizing that we have this year, FY21 taken care of, FY22, hopefully through the budget process taken care of, what we're going to be trying to deal with is how do we bring that $3 million floor to FY23. Am I correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying.
So either one of you. So if the process that I'm hearing from Councilor Garcia and others, to me sounds like a 6-month, 8-month process, community input, getting together, talking to everybody, going through the committee process, all that. It's going to take some time. And I just want to make sure that we're not tying up funds or tying Alexandra's hands up with a process that may take 6 to 8 months to complete. Do you have any concerns with that, Alexandra, or am I overthinking it?
Maybe. Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I think, yes, I do have concerns I think it's a really valuable process. And that, I think that's back to my other point, that just we have to be super focused on the outcome. And why are we doing this? We're doing this to secure funding for the trust fund. We're not doing this to ask the entire community to weigh in on what they think we should be funding with the funds. So it's really it's almost more of a working group kind of situation. And I think in that context, it can be fairly efficient.
Okay, that's good to hear. All right, thank you. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. I just want to weigh in a little bit again about how I envision what we're doing here. And I think I spoke about this a little bit at the Finance Committee meeting about what we're doing with this resolution is spelling out what is essentially our committee process. And it's not a strategic plan. So I think there's a difference here. And we don't really, in order to vet the policy suggestions, recommendations that have come to us through various reports from our community nonprofits and advocates, we don't need this resolution in order to do that. We are putting it forward because we want to give the opportunity, as Alexandra has said, everybody's interested in affordable housing. That hasn't always been true. And this is an opportunity for the whole council to say, yes, we want to see this work done. And we want, and we are committed to finding the revenue streams that will provide a consistent, reliable funding for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, you know, at the $3 million, what we've been calling now a floor. And so for me, it's sort of a, like we have with the various reports that this committee has heard presentations about, we have the list of recommendations. And so I would say I sort of like Councilor Cassett Sanchez's idea is what we can do is, and if I had time, I was actually going to do this for tonight's meeting is, we can make a list of all the things that have come to us. And we can, and I had offered this at the Finance Committee meeting, have the chairs come together and, basically what we're doing is referring these ideas to the committees. And I used at Finance the idea that the GO bond idea is already being vetted by the Finance Committee. We tonight heard about the Economic Development Fund. I think there's some policy suggestions that we tap into utility funds. So this committee would not be the right place to hear that. That needs to go to Public Works and Public Utilities, because the staff for that committee, those are the people who are the experts about those funds and about why they have as much money as they do and why you can or can't use those funds, for why you can't siphon those funds away. And that's, I think, what we're going to learn is, can you, or legally are we constrained from pulling that money? So I think most of these things have a proper place to go. We could, develop a list and bring it to a governing body meeting and set aside a little bit of time to say, all right, these ideas are going to be vetted by these committees. And then that would allow, if somebody says, you could object, I guess. You could say, well, you know what? I want to make sure that the GO bond is heard over here at quality of life. And I think, the idea of having a study session once we have vetted by the committees all the different proposals that have come to us was so that if you don't sit on a particular committee, we'll come together and we'll have had the presentations and the write-up memos from the committee work, and they'll be able to be presented with us all sitting together, so we can say, so we all make sure we have the same information if you don't sit on the committees. And then we'll hopefully see a path forward in how we do this. I think we all participate. Nobody's not participating. I mean, we all are members of committees. We are also all not members of committees. Like, I don't sit on Public Works and Public Utilities. So, and I am very interested to know what's going to happen with what staff says about those utility funds and whether they're a viable source, whether a portion of them can be siphoned for this. I'm very interested in that conversation. I don't sit on that committee, but I look forward to that study session where I will hear the results of any staff work done to vet that particular idea. So again, I think we're all going to participate, and I am worried, though. I think there's a way to do this without adding another study session. And again, our committee process vets all the time proposals. And so I think, to the extent that somebody has an idea that isn't part of one of the community suggestions that have been brought forward, I have said I'm perfectly willing to hear those ideas. So I don't think it's a question of, you won't be taken seriously by a committee chair. I think a committee chair will absolutely, if you have an idea as a counselor that isn't part of the committee, part of the community reports that we have had, I'm happy to add that to the list. And if it's appropriate for this committee to vet, then we'll add it to the agenda. So I think we should look at all of these things because they've all been suggested by various groups as being viable funding sources. And I think that's what we now need to confirm, just like we did earlier tonight with the Economic Development Fund. We can tap into that. We just have to decide at what level we want to tap into it and how we want to do it. And that's, there's nothing constraining us there. There may be other ideas that do constrain us. And so anyway, I've said my piece. What's the pleasure of the committee on this, or is there more discussion?
I've got something to say, Madam Chair.
Okay,
And
I'm sorry, Counselor Villarreal raised her hand first, so I'll go to her
Sure.
and then to you, Counselor.
Actually, go ahead, Counselor Garcia. I want to hear what you have to say, and then I wanted to make a comment about the other amendment that you all haven't seen that I wanted to talk about that may help with this clarification, maybe not, but go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal. And I do want to apologize to my fellow committee members. I wasn't trying to put somebody in a predicament. I guess just my passion on us working towards a collaborative effort on this is just, I want to ensure collaboration is key. So I do apologize for that. Chair Romero-Worth, I do like your idea of having a list reviewed at a governing body meeting, because we could do that at a discussion action item. I think that intention, that is the spirit of the intention of this amendment, is that we as a body are able to review as a body a list and have that kind of discussion on it. So I think that maybe is the best vehicle. I just want us to be able to have our discussions together, because there has been so many discussions in silos. We need to have these discussions together. And so I think you did bring up a great idea. And I think maybe that is the appropriate avenue for this, is reviewing a list as a discussion item during a governing body meeting. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. And I'm gonna give the nexus of that, of the credit for that idea to Counselor Cassett Sanchez. Councilwoman Villarreal, you have your hand up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was exactly what I was going to say. That was actually Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez's idea. I think that would help. That frame it a little bit better, instead of feeling like conversations happen behind closed doors without some of us. And that feels shitty. So I'm just letting you know that all of us care about this. I feel like if there's a concerted effort to be collaborative, then it'll feel better that, you know, that we all have a role to play, and that it's coming from all of us, not because it's election season. So I just want to state that. I think Councilor Garcia, we could do a placeholder and maybe not vote on your resolution tonight, because I don't think it's where I'm feeling comfortable yet. And so I think I just want to make that statement and then talk about, I guess, Chair Romero-Worth, if you could just let us know when to talk about this next resolution piece.
Well, yeah, and I just also want to point out one thing. So I don't think anybody's intentionally trying to leave anybody out. You know, we do have this rolling quorum problem, right? So you can only talk to 4 counselors, and then you can't talk to any more. So I just want to dispel this notion that, you know, people are trying to leave other people out. And I think, you know, as things move through the committee process, we all get to weigh in and, you know, make our amendments and make our points and, you know, argue for why we don't do or don't like something. So I don't think anybody's trying to create hard feelings. So, and I'm sorry, I forgot. Wait, did you ask me something? Oh, when we're going to talk about your amendment. So we don't have a motion on the floor. I just sort of let conversation happen with this other one. So if we're done talking about it, and I do feel like I was trying to look through what just got sent with your amendment. So I think you're going to have to walk us through it, because I haven't had time to look at it. And I don't think any of us have. So if the committee's ready to do that, I'm fine. Councilor Cassett Sanchez does have her hand up. So I do want to yield to her first if she still wants to talk about this.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm, Councilor Garcia, you had mentioned that you think this goes to council the 28th. So does that mean we would have another opportunity to bring it back with a reworked amendment before then, Chair?
Yes, so I think, you know, it probably, well, I was thinking we could add it to Councilor Villarreal's amendment but if we pass her amendment, if we add, well, yeah, we can rework it and it'll go, I think this is its last committee stop. Am I right, Jesse? So it would have to get amended to governing body, but at least we've talked about it here, so that's good.
Do we have an opportunity to bring it back here to amend
Yeah,
it here?
I almost hate to do that. Do we have another meeting before then? So
I
it
don't
goes,
Or if we did or not already. I wouldn't want to, it doesn't. feel-
actually, it's, well, am I looking the right thing? It goes to Public Works and Public Utilities on the 12th. So it can be amended there.
And Councilor Garcia, I'd be more than happy to work on that amendment with you and reworking it to look at the different ideas. So I'll chat with you offline about that. That was all. And then Councilor.
Okay,
Gator,
so then I think if the committee's ready, we can move on and talk about Councilwoman Villarreal's amendment, but I think you are going to have to walk us through it because we're not familiar with it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just noticed what Jesse sent is not accurate.
Oops.
I know Jesse tried to put it together so that you all can have it in a readable form. What I have in my track changes is not the same. The last version that we did together, including Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, and then also getting feedback from Director Ladd, it's not reflected on this.
So could we just talk about it maybe conceptually? Because I do have, there's a couple things in here that if they are accurate, I do have questions about. So can you, rather than us focusing on the language,
Okay.
can you just talk, and you did a little bit at finance, but I think your thinking has probably gelled a little bit more since then.
Okay. So at the beginning, I think some of those adjustments were just statements to frame the whereas more accurately, like the multi-family housing development applications. They increased during or since 2016. That's just a language tweak. If you keep going down, I did add a most recent down on page 2 when we're talking about the median sales price. I adjusted that to what it was at the end of 2020, which was 106. And then
Madam Chair, Councilor, if I can just say on that note, I think it was 560 if we're looking at county, right?
right.
That's what came out in the paper today was 560.
So where I got that number, and it doesn't matter wherever we find it, I actually looked at the Realtors Association number on their last report they gave us, and that number for the 2020 fourth quarter was 606,000. So whatever's the most accurate number, I'm fine with using. I just know that we were looking at 2019 and it should show the most current. So, and then if you go further down on page 3, I did add a whereas that says funding allocation recommendations from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund are made by the Community Development Commission based on HUD funding priorities and emerging community needs with guidance by the Office of Affordable Housing staff. And that was just to note that that's a big component to this piece of the puzzle that wasn't acknowledged before. I believe Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez added some language that we had talked about in finance about where the Affordable Housing Trust Fund expenditures, what they're restricted to support. And she added language providing rental or down payment assistance to eligible residents. If you go further down, Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, do you want to talk about that language change? Because that's one that didn't show up on the track changes.
I have it here. It was changed on now page 3, now it'd be line 18, whereas the city endorses the property management plus supportive housing model. It had originally said is implementing, which doesn't quite describe what we're doing as we're not on the ground. So I wanted to make sure that we were clear that it is not something that we are directly providing, but rather something that we are hoping to expand and support within the city.
Thank you. And then when we go into on page 3, well, maybe on page 3, the first now therefore be it resolved is that it would state that the 3 city council standing committees and the Community Development Commission shall take on the work of reviewing evaluating and assessing a broad set of proposals and recommendations for
Can
revenue.
I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
So historically, the Community Development Commission does really important work, as you've identified in one of the whereas clauses in the beginning, in terms of directing where the funding goes from the a portion of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It hasn't historically played a policy role. And so I'm curious about inserting it here in that way and I wonder also I don't know if you have a resolution that created you, that commission, whether that's within the scope of that group. And again, back to my original point, which is the idea behind this resolution was that these ideas would be vetted through our committee process, which is, and I completely agree that the resolution didn't acknowledge the very important work that you did and that you do, and particularly as chair of that group. So I'm glad to have that added into the the bigger context of the work that the city does and the important work of that commission. But I have to say I'd be curious in your thoughts, because that group is not a policy, and it's sort of outside of what was intended by this, which is meant to be our committee process.
It's not a policy entity, it's a recommending body. The reason why I added that in is because we do actually review and make recommendations for revenue sources, or we have in the past. And we also look at the affordable housing priorities list and actually assist staff with reviewing those. So the key word there was reviewing. So I was trying to figure out like what role the Community Development Commission shall play in that process of reviewing and evaluating proposals and recommendations, because we should hear those, because those directly affect us. I just don't know where it fits in.
Well, they don't directly. I mean, when you say that, what do you mean by that? They don't directly, because if we decide, let's say we decide to take half of the economic development fund and put it towards this, that doesn't affect you. I mean, it affects you in the sense that now you have more money to spend, but it doesn't, we're not taking money from you. So I don't
think it affects us in a detrimental way. It's a positive thing in that we have more funding to potentially allocate, which means that we will need to figure out how we're going to structure ourselves so that a grant making process or those grant recommendation reviews that we do, we may have to do a second round of it in the year instead of just 1 year. One time.
Yeah, and let me push back on that too. And again, I think what's going to happen is you don't want to be evaluating that like little pot by little pot, right? You want to know, okay, we're going to start to have $3 million every fiscal year to spend. That I agree. And then you're working with Alexandra, you're going to have to figure out, all right, what portion of that is going to be funneled to your group to figure out how to allocate for the things that you do, and what portion of it, like we've already talked about, are we going to be using for developing the other things that we need in the spectrum of housing. So for instance, we've talked about possibly the purchase of another hotel. And so that I agree, but I don't know why all these individual funding pieces have to be reviewed by you, because you need to look at the bigger picture of what are we going to do with $3 million a year with the commitment that the objective that we're trying to make.
Well, I understand what you're talking about. I just don't want to disregard that role of the Community Development Commission. I just don't know where it fits in to the language. So I placed it there. I'm assuming that we say further on that, where is it? Somewhere about relevant city committees, that they would be part of that process. Do you, Alexandra, do you see anything that we could adjust? Maybe not at the moment, but not placing it on the same level, policy level as standing committees, but there is, I think, an important role that we play, not just with the allocation, but like how I think there's members in the there's community members on the Community Development Commission that actually have expertise and an ability to share what they think also related to revenue sources might be useful for us. So I don't want to disregard that this body doesn't have any kind of important contributions.
Councillor Villarreal, one role for the Community Development Commission might be to review the final kind of assembly of different recommendations and provide comments on sort of that, to Councillor Romero Worth's point, the bigger picture side of things.
Okay, so maybe it doesn't belong there, but I think
Maybe it needs its own.
Possibly.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez, you've got your hand up. I can tell you're dying to get into this conversation.
No, I mean, I think Alexandra just came up with a solution to the problem that I was trying to mull this over. Is okay, how do we gather the expertise of this group and their input, but at the same time, it's not like they would hear something and them hearing it would negate it having to come to one of the council standing committees. But then if it goes to both, then it's two presentations that staff has to do. So I was kind of trying to balance that out, but I think Alexandra, in her brilliance as usual, came up with a solution. So thank you for that.
so. We'll skip that piece to make it more succinct with where they fit into the process. There was language that's further down, another further resolved, that the city manager is directed to create a work plan for staff support of this process so that each committee is ensured of the participation and contribution from subject matter experts.
Yeah, and I guess I have to push back here too. I really think we don't need to. I don't think this is as hard as we think it is. You know, I think we can come up with this list of all the things, and we can say, all right, quality of life is going to look at this one, public works and utilities is going to look at this one, finance is going to look with this one. Now with what we've already discussed, we can bring that list to a governing body meeting and say, all right, these are where these guys are going to go. Anybody, you know, have an objection? I don't know that we need this, because I think that's what's going to, and that was, you know, I think what you were talking about at finance the other night is similar to what Councilor Garcia has been trying to do with his amendment. And so with the two, I think we may have fixed this.
Well, in this case, this is also a staff recommendation. It's really not coming from me. I think that we don't know the back end, like, you know, inner workings of what's happening, just coordination.
Yeah.
That's needed. So that's actually a staff recommendation.
Yeah, and I guess, and I'm sorry, Alex, I meant to call you today, but it got away from me. In terms of, because I can see where you, and I don't know that this came from you, but the other night from the finance committee meeting, I can imagine that this is all this attention suddenly on your office, I'm sure, is a little bit, while welcome, you are almost a one-woman show. So I don't want this to be added work for you. Again, I'm hoping that the staff that staffs the various committees will be able to do a lot of this work, but I may not have a very good understanding of what will be required by your office in order to vet some of these things. So I'm open to being educated.
Madam Chair, I think I think what would be super helpful is to just have somebody who is directed to coordinate the process. And generally in resolutions, it's the city manager, and then she would say, okay, Mary McCoy, your staff needs to provide this information at this meeting on this date. So it's not, you know, it's not a super, maybe to your point, maybe it makes it too complicated, and maybe there's a simpler way to say it. But I think that's that helps because everybody's on the same page. They know a little bit to the way that the presentations have been scheduled in front of this committee. So this is the topic. We know what day we're going to talk about it. We've got other staff lined up. We're coordinating kind of who's covering what. Like it's not just sort of a ad hoc, oh, well, let me tell you what's inside my brain right now. It's actually a little more focused.
Well, and again, this is why I think this is the role for the committee chairs, right? Is that is, you know, what and I think somebody made this point the other night. I think it was Director Brown. I mean, I do have a standing meeting with staff to plan out the agendas, and we try to, you know, plan them out. You know, we're already working on May and it's April. So, you know, it's so that we give staff plenty of time to know that, okay, we're going to talk about GO bonds on, you know, our May 17th meeting. I'm making things up. And so that there, and again, as we've talked about, I think we're going to be doing this for a while. And so I think while it seems scary and a lot of work right now, we have time, and we are going to use the committee meetings for the foreseeable future. And I don't know what that's going to take for us to get there. But I think, you know, this represents a lot of work over a significant period of time for us to properly vet the different ideas. And I don't know if that provides any, I don't know, comfort or, you know, makes it more, doesn't seem so overwhelming, or, you know, just the way we do, the way we, you know, we know the committee meetings that we have over the course of the year, and those are the ones that we'll be using meeting by meeting, bit by bit, to look at these different ideas.
I think that we'll just hold that thought for now on that language and decide if it makes sense. I'm
happy to think about it with you, and we can talk.
Okay. And then I moved up the quality of life paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is reflected on the draft you're looking at, but that quality of life specifically shall explore benefits of and options for developing regular and consistent funding. And we added from sources external to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for wraparound services, et cetera.
Yeah.
I moved that up so that will be right under when we're talking about the 3 council standing committees, because that's actually a little bit different of the area of focus for quality of life committee, because
and I understand why you did that, and let me just tell you why I had it the other way, which is that the bulk of this resolution is how do we vet the ideas that have come to us about how we create the revenue stream for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That is really what most of this resolution does. But then tacked on at the end were 2 ideas. One was this idea of, you know, we have not just been wanting to build housing or create housing across the housing spectrum of need that we have, but we also understand that at certain levels, people need these social service support, behavioral health support, other social service help in order to be successful in that housing and be successful in getting on their feet. So that I see as like, it's like an add-on, which is why it was at the end. And then the other add-on was the questions that have arisen as we talk about creating all this housing, the other things that come with housing that we think about, that Councillor Cassett-Sanchez has been very articulate about, and she, among others, have been talking about, have you thought about these other things that happen as a result of creating all this housing? And so that's where the growth, the idea that we need to get serious about growth management plan and beginning to look at that process. So for me, those 2 things were add-ons to the bigger thing of how do we fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's why I had it at the end. So.
I mean, I think it's important to state what it does. I was just thinking it actually fell in line with the standing committee, their goals, because right after that, we're talking about proposals and recommendations considered for analysis. That's going to be part of what quality of life is, committee is going to be looking at. So I guess it doesn't, I put it up at the top, only because the other further resolved pieces actually apply to all of them. So we'll just have to look at the order of where maybe
Yeah.
these belong.
And I'll let me just read this. Quality of Life Committee specifically shall explore the benefits of and options for. So, I mean, we are, in this sense, for that particular thing, we are a step back from where we are with funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, right? We have specific proposals in front of us to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What we're looking at through this quality of life committee direction is we've got to figure out what the options are. We're one step back, or more maybe. We've got to figure out what level of funding do we currently have. What does the universe of funding options look like? What role does the city have in any of those? What things do we control? So we may even want to, as I think about it, we may even want some help from outside groups, similar to how we've had outside groups weighing in on how do we fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So in that sense, I just don't want people to get confused that that is almost separate work, but very related to funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the implications of having that level of funding year in and year out. So.
Okay, I think I'll just have to look at that as a whole again, reading through these different sections. I'm just going to move on.
Yep.
To the next one that was just changing the language. It says, be it further resolved that not the individual recommendations, but potential recommendations, because they're not coming from individuals. I added, as well as the Community Development Commission, about their, I'll just have to look at that again because
okay.
the bigger picture piece that Alexandra said, maybe there's a further be resolved that's specific to the Community Development Commission role.
Yep.
And then towards the end, I just adjusted the language. It's on page 4 and it goes into page 5. About the mix of funding sources. I said mix of opportunities to provide consistent, reliable, and sustainable funding sources for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Okay.
I think that's it. Unless
what did you do to this last thing about the growth management thing? What's the difference between the strikeout and the?
Which one are you seeing? I don't have any.
The last two, be it further resolved. So one of them, it's the one that talks about beginning to develop a blueprint for a growth management planning process. In mine, there's a strikeout, and then there's.
I don't have a strikeout on mine. Do you have anything on yours?
Okay.
No, that shouldn't be struck out. Although there was a question about growth management, using that word as if growth was needed to be managed. Director,
it's a term of art, though. People, I mean, I hear you, but
there's something, Alexandra, that was a term that is also used, but we didn't make this amendment. I'm just trying to remember if there was another way to say growth management planning.
It's just evaporated out of my head.
Yeah, me too. All right, well, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We didn't make any changes in that section, so I'm not sure. That's why I have to give you all a cleaner copy, and I appreciate that Jesse tried to make this work, but it's probably more confusing what you all received. But
okay, so just how does this go forward? So again, we've heard that this goes to Public Works and Public Utilities. I can't remember. Do you sit on that committee?
No.
None of, well, Councilor Garcia, you sit on it. Councilor Rivera chairs it. There we go. So we have 2 members. So somebody could offer this amendment there. on your behalf if you were to task somebody to do that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, are we that pressed for time that it couldn't come back to this committee one more time?
When is our next committee meeting? Hold on. So yeah, I guess it could come back on the 21st. So why don't we do that? Well, so we'll just, let's see, if we don't want to hold it here,
I can still propose it.
but how do we bring the bill back here? Well, I think maybe what we say is that after it goes to Public Works and Public Utilities, we'd like it to come back before it goes to governing body. Yeah. Counselor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Yeah, there was one, it's a very tiny amendment that was missed. It's on page 3, line 10. It said, whereas city staff have identified other potential sources of funds for the AHT Affordable Housing Trust Fund that require legislative actions is required. So I took out the second is required. So it just reads, city staff have identified other potential sources of funds for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that require legislative action. So there was just a language issue there. Wanted to note it.
Good. All right. So does somebody want to make a motion about where this bill, bringing this bill back?
I move to bring this bill back to the April 21st Quality of Life Committee meeting to review more amendments. I probably don't know.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to bring the bill back after it goes to Public Works and Public Utilities before it goes to the governing body, and we will schedule it on our April 21st meeting. And then hopefully the amendments that Councilor Villarreal has talked about tonight, and I think maybe even the ones that Councilor Garcia has in the mix too. So, all right. I don't know, Councilor Garcia, I don't want to speak for you. Maybe you wanted to introduce them at Public Works and Public Utilities, but certainly you'll have the opportunity to have it here too. So two shots, 2 bites of the apple. All right. We will move on then. I think LMN.
Sorry, Madam Chair, do we need
Madam Chair, I think we need to have a vote.
Oh, we do need to have a vote.
I got it.
It was such a collaborative process. I had forgotten. Jennifer, can you call the vote?
Sure. Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. We are going to item N, and Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I think you pulled this first. And then also Councilor Villarreal, you had pulled it, and there may be others who want to weigh in here.
Yeah, I don't really have questions at this point. So much of it was covered in the presentation, and I just think that there's a little bit more to think about here. Jesse, what is the schedule for this bill? I'd like to hold it. I think that we need to be reviewing some of these options a little bit more and potentially looking at if we want to amend it. I'm not ready to make that decision at this time. So Jesse, what is the schedule?
Madam Chair, councilors, after this, it's currently scheduled for the public hearing at governing body on the 28th. So there is, I believe, one more quality of life meeting that we could go to.
Great. Yeah, that'd be my request, is to once again bring this one back. Give us a couple weeks to think about this. Councilwoman Villarreal, I think there's like this chicken and egg place where you're talking about the piece of affordable housing and how crucial that is for economic development. And I'm like, yes. And then we also need economic development so people can afford housing. And so I think for me, having a bit more time to massage that balance and look at these different funds is what I would request to do. So,
so maybe a motion to postpone until our next meeting.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to bring this back.
You just became muted. You went away.
Better?
Yes, you're
Okay.
back. Try it again. Oh, you're gone.
I would like to make a motion to
There you
bring this item back at the April 21st Quality of Life meeting.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Counselor Cassett Sanchez to postpone this item to our next meeting on the 21st, and a second from Councilwoman Villarreal. Jennifer, can you take a vote, a roll call for us?
Yes, Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, we are now to action items for discussion. We do not have any of those tonight. Matters from staff. Jennifer, do you have anything for us?
None for me tonight, Madam Chair.
All right, matters from the committee. Seeing none, matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Wednesday, April 21st. We know that. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the conversation. We'll see you at our next stop. Good night. We're adjourned.